Welcome back to Saints and Sinners, the place where legends breathe, tyrants brood, and history's martyrs walk the line between myth and memory. Hit follow, tap subscribe, leave a review, and settle in, because today's tale, it marches with the cadence of rebellion, it sings with the defiance of freedom fighters, and it bleeds with the courage of a child who stood where grown men trembled. A land ruled by iron, a people ordered to kneel, a government terrified of faith, because faith ignites the kind of courage swords can't kill. And somewhere in the middle of this rising storm, not a warrior, not a giant, but a boy with a painted face shouting freedom into the void, a child whose innocence would prove more dangerous than any blade. Parents, there's a disclaimer here. If you have any children listening to this right now, please be aware that there are some graphic details. And I worry about that because we're talking about a child here. So if you have children, I recommend that all you parents listen to this episode first and decide if it's good for your children to listen to. Thank you. Now, where was I? All right, that's right. This is Saints and Sinners. He was born under a quiet sky in a country where faith stitched families together like thread through cloth. His village was the kind where church bells weren't just background noise. They were the heartbeat, compass, and anchor. He was a fiery one, though, a spark in human form. Quick on his feet, quicker with his laughter. Always the first to climb the tallest tree or break into a sprint just because he felt like flying. If courage had a childhood, it looked like this. And courage needs a place to shine. And so the land had to darken first, like it does in every rebellion story. Voices fade, and the boots of power grow louder. His country had fallen under leaders who feared faith more than foreign armies. Churches shuttered, priests arrested, public worship outlawed. The message was clear: bow or break. For adults, fear meant survival. For him, it meant nothing. He watched soldiers ride into his town like thunderstorms on horseback, heavy, sudden, and unwelcome. He watched families get ripped apart, statues fall, crucifixes burn, and men dragged off for the crime of kneeling to someone other than the tyrant. He was only a boy, but boys see clearly before the world teaches them how to look away. You see, rebellion stirs slowly in most men. In him, it ignited like dry brush meeting a spark. He wanted to join the resistance, the rebels who fought to defend the faith of their fathers. He was 12, too young, too small, too fiery for his own good. They told him no, of course, turning him away, laughing the kind of nervous laugh grown men make when they know they are outnumbered, outmatched, and outgunned. But anyone with children knows that they don't understand no when their conscience says go. So one night, as smoke curled into the sky from a desecrated chapel, he said to his mother what every child should when they realize the world is not as gentle as it was meant to be. Mama, do not let me lose the opportunity to gain heaven so easily and so soon. She simply cupped his face and said the words that would echo through the rest of his short life. If God wants you to die, I will resign myself to his will. No William Wallace speech, no swelling orchestral cue, just a mother giving heaven permission to take her son, and giving her son permission to take heaven. The next morning he marches back to the commander and requests sentry among the ranks. Something that night had torn at the general. Something deep, something pressing, something otherworldly. Instead of the nervous laugh, the general hands him a banner, a flag, and tells him that he is to hold the line, stir courage in the hearts of his men, and do what God has willed him to do. He led the fighters through forests and hillsides, through ambushes and escapes, always refusing to stay behind, always stepping forward when logic told him to run. And when the general's horse was killed in battle and they were being overrun, it was this boy, this child, who volunteered his horse to the general so he could live to fight another day. The general left knowing what would become of the boy, but also knowing what would become of the rebellion if he hadn't volunteered his horse. As the general looked at the boy with tears in both their eyes, they both exclaimed, "Viva Cristo Rey!" And with that, the general took off. As he looked back at the boy, he saw what no man ever wants to see happen to his children. And that's where the real story begins. Most rebels are caught with weapons in hand, blood on their clothes, and defiance in their posture. He was caught with courage in his pocket and innocence in his eyes. The soldiers dragged him into camp, expecting fear, begging, and tears. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. They found calm, steadiness, and a child who seemed to understand that life was too short to not live boldly. They locked him in a church that they had turned into a prison, starving him, beating him, trying to pry information from a boy who barely weighed 80 pounds and was the same age as most of their children. They demanded he shout praises to their leader. He refused. They demanded he curse the rebellion. He refused. Then they demanded the ultimate betrayal. Renounce your God. He looked up, bruised, bleeding, and barefoot, and answered a warrior who'd spent a lifetime on battlefields he'd barely even seen. I will never do that, but I will pray for you. His voice didn't tremble, but the soldiers did. Because cruelty has no idea what to do with innocence bound in steadfastness and love. The night before his execution, his aunt was allowed to visit him. She wasn't able to bring anything with her, but she managed to sneak in the Eucharist. For his last meal, he had Holy Communion, the true bread of life. The next morning, they tried to humiliate him. They dragged him out with an onslaught of beatings. He was bleeding out of every orifice, from every part of his body, but yet he stood. Viva Cristo Rey, orare por ti. I will pray for you. Then they flayed the skin from the soles of his feet and forced him to walk across stones, glass, and salt on the streets to the place where they would kill him. His skinless feet leaving crescent moon shapes in the dirt behind him like a trail of rosary beads. He walked, not only being stabbed by pain, but by the soldiers' bayonets, all the while stumbling, shouting, Viva Cristo Rey, and praying, not for himself, but for the men walking beside him. Because somehow, impossibly, he still believed they could be forgiven. As dawn crept over the horizon like a reluctant witness, pale and trembling, the soldiers gathered, boots crunching against the dirt, each of them silently hoping someone would give them the order personally. The commander barked, "Renounce your faith, and you live." The boy lifted his head, eyes alive and steady, the kind of eyes only martyrs or madmen ever possess. Viva Cristo Rey! They beat him until he collapsed. They raised him again. Renounce! Viva Cristo Rey! They stabbed him more. But innocence isn't as fragile as men assume. With every wound, he whispered the same rebellious prayer, a prayer sharper than any weapon he could have carried. They made him dig his own grave in one last attempt to get him to renounce. Tell me who to forgive, he said while digging. Finally, the commander, who happened to be his godfather, tired of the spectacle, gave the final order. As he stood there waiting, he drew a cross on the ground with his own blood. His godfather asked in a sarcastic tone, "What should I tell your mother?" With his jaw broken from a buttstock of a rifle, he mutters that we should see each other in heaven. Viva Cristo Rey. And with that, his pistol barrel pressed behind the boy's ear and pulled the trigger. His body collapsed like a banner finally lowered after the battle is won. It was not the cry of a defeated rebel. It was the cry of a child whose soul refused to bend. And refused to bend it did. He lay there in the bottom of the pit, blood soaking the dirt, having just had a bullet point blank through the head. Then, in the eerie quiet, something began to stir. He stood up and murmured, Viva Cristo Rey, one last time, and collapsed. His godfather, flabbergasted, eyes wide, turns around and shoots him one more time, just for good measure. And so the story spreads of a boy who walked with flayed feet, who faced his captors with a courage no blade could cut, who died young, but died free, whose purity outwitted brutality, and whose defiance sounded suspiciously like freedom. This isn't a story about a rebel who painted his face blue, shouted at armies at horseback, and became a legend carved into stone. It's easy to believe that, because courage this fierce, it echoes. But this wasn't William Wallace. There was no kilt, no claymore, and no blue face. This was a 12-year-old boy in a small Mexican town in 1928, under the shadow of a government terrified of the cross. His name? José Luis Sánchez del Rio, Cristero, martyr, child of God, saint. You know, this story reminds me that we live in an age that keeps whispering the same lie. Make it easy, make it painless, make it comfortable. A Christianity without costs, a discipleship without demands, a faith that bends whenever the world pushes, and a belief in something so watered down it no longer is what it says it is. At school, at work, online, even in our own homes, the pressure is constant. Don't stand out, don't speak up, don't be too Christian. Just blend in, soften the edges a little, keep the peace, even if it costs the truth. But heaven doesn't call us to comfort. Heaven calls us to courage. And that kind of courage doesn't show up fully grown. It starts in the heart of a child. Not a childish heart that seeks feelings and emotional highs, but a childlike one, the kind Christ praised. A heart capable of trust, a heart quick to obey, a heart that believes God means what he says and is worth whatever the cost may be. Jose had that kind of heart, pure enough to see God's justice, brave enough to embrace God's will, and steady enough to walk into suffering with the clarity of someone who knows exactly who he is and whose he is. He didn't have power. He didn't have age. He didn't have influence. What he had was conviction, the kind that makes grown men tremble and tyrants furious. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If a 12-year-old boy could refuse to bend when staring down rifles, bayonets, and hatred, what excuse do the rest of us have when all we're facing is social pressure, awkward silence, or the fear of being unliked or unfollowed? So the next time the world tells you to sit down, to stay quiet, and to blend in, remember the boy who refused all three and walked straight into heaven's open arms. Be the kind of person whose faith scares the darkness. Be the kind of disciple who would rather bleed than betray. Be the kind of soul who can say, even through tears, Viva Cristo Rey. Holiness was never supposed to be painless. It's supposed to be transformative. And in order to be transformative, it has to mean something. It has to cost us something. It has to be sacrificial in nature. And courageous sacrificial Christianity, the kind that refuses to bend, is still the heartbeat of the church. Leave a review, hit subscribe, share the show with someone who needs a reminder that courage isn't dead. It just tends to look small, young, and underestimated. Until then, keep your spine straight, your prayers fierce, and your heart as pure as the boy who walked into heaven barefoot. Because saints rise, sinners fall, and history, especially the history written in the blood of children, bears witness.